With the NHL trade deadline knocking on the door, I want to make my bold predictions before things get even more crazy. Every single year at the deadline, we see trades and moves that we would never have expected, so today I'm going to be going through some of my biggest bold predictions on teams, players, and trades that we'll see at this year's deadline. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the trade rumors and all of the full predictions, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more trade content as we lead up to the deadline this Friday. Now, with how much this trade deadline has been in flux this season, I could honestly go all over the place. There were a bunch of bold predictions that I didn't even include on this list. I mean, who would have thought that Seth Jones would be going to Florida in the first place, that a player like Jake Evans would end up re-signing at the cap hit he did with Montreal? A lot of surprises are still yet to come, and we're going to document some of them right here, right now. Now, going on to the first bold prediction of the bunch, let's start out today with the Boston Bruins and why I believe they'll be one of the biggest sellers at this year's deadline. Now, I wrote this before the Trent Frederic trade, and now it seems a lot less hot. But now with that Frederic trade, it shows how willing the Bruins are to sell out different pieces, and they have so much more that they could potentially get rid of. I don't think they're going to strip it down to the studs, but they have a few players here with pretty surplus value that I think for the Bruins, it would make sense to get rid of. Brad Marchand, of course, as the captain, is fantastic still at this age. I mean, this year, still on pace for 63 points, but he's 36 years old, not getting any younger still, and is not somebody that's a core part of that Bruins future, especially for the value. If you could get a potential first-round pick plus, I think for the Bruins, you have to make that deal. Like Brandon Carlo, we've heard recently could be out there as well for the Bruins. He's somebody that has a 6'5" defenseman, has been all over the place in his effectiveness with injuries, concussions, and all that going up and down, but he's somebody that can still be a reliable defenseman, though not much more than that. If the Bruins can get away with him, I think he could be somebody that could get a lot of value, kind of like as a mini Colton Parayko for some teams. And then Pavel Zacha is the last one that I would give a look to if I'm the Bruins. He's somebody that has also been up and down. The inconsistency is the name of the game here, but in terms of the point totals, he's been great ever since he's come to Boston, obviously playing with the Bruins' top-end players, but he's been a good complementary piece, and for I think a lot of teams out there looking for a center like that, Zacha can fill that hole. Now, even though I think the Bruins will do a lot of this deadline to make some massive moves, I don't think they're going to go in a complete rebuilding mode. I think the purpose of this deadline is to try and retool the pick cupboard as well as the prospect pool to potentially have assets to trade this offseason to hopefully go next year with a much more different team, with a core that looks a lot different, that can hopefully help the top-end players like Pastrnak and McAvoy a lot better than the current core that just has not gotten the job done. For the Bruins, they still have great players in every single position. Pastrnak, of course, on forward, McAvoy on defense, and even though Jeremy Swayman hasn't had the greatest season this year, an .898 save percentage, I think he'll be just fine going forward. I think a lot of that is because of the struggles early on in the season, getting back into the swing of things, getting back to that hockey speed, especially for goaltending. So much of it is technical, so much of it is in your head, and for him, I just don't think he was quite prepared to come into the season with the contract negotiations, and I think next year, it'll be a lot better for him. But that's what I see the Bruins doing, trying to focus on next season now, and I think that would be wise because I doubt they're going to make the playoffs at this rate, and I don't think they should waste their time trying. It's pretty rare to actually think about the Bruins and selling at the deadline, but I think for Boston, the writing is on the wall. They need to make some changes because this current core and how it's set up, I just don't think is going to work out. Now we go into the second bold prediction of the day, and we're going to go into another Atlantic Division team here. We're going to move on to the Florida Panthers, and I think they're going to use the Matthew Tkachuk LTIR space to acquire somebody major. Now, of course, brutal injury news after the Four Nations, with Matthew Tkachuk looking like he's going to be out for the rest of the season, at least being an LTIR. That is pretty rough news to see. Not really most of the surprising thing. Tkachuk always seems to find himself with those big injuries, but he's somebody that has been through so much of it, has been such an important player for this Panthers team, and you can see in 52 games this year, 57 points, not quite up to the 2023 type of level, but still a fantastic player and a true leader for that franchise. He's going to be somebody that's sorely missed, but you do put that contract on LTIR, and it gives the Panthers a lot more space to work with. And when you go through the NHL and sort by deadline cap space, the Florida Panthers are actually right up there among the half of the league that has the more cap space now with the LTIR Matthew Tkachuk contract. It gives them a lot of flexibility here to do a lot with their team. Now, putting aside the obvious of Florida likely going for a backup goaltender, this is to me the most likely thing that Florida will do this deadline. Chris Trigger is just not the guy there, hasn't been in the NHL, and especially hasn't been in the AHL systems for Florida. They need somebody bona fide that can play behind Bobrovsky if worse comes to worse. We have, of course, the Spencer Knight trade to Chicago. I think that's the most likely thing, but with a backup goaltender, that should only take $1 million, $2 million maybe. You have still about $6 million plus to work with. I think the defense is pretty locked in though, which leaves the forward group with, I think, the most room to maneuver. Of course, Matthew Tkachuk as a left wing, I think makes that left wing side once he comes back still pretty important and still pretty log jammed. but the right wing is where I think they can make some upgrades, especially in that middle six. You do have Jesper Broquist, who just got a recent contract extension, but he most likely fits as a better fourth liner rather than a third. In the case of a player like Rodrigues, you could put him down to the third line and potentially going after a big target to fill that second line hole. Now, a player I mentioned before is Brock Boeser, who would be an amazing fit there, but I also have a couple other players that I want to mention. Oliver Bjorkstrand is one we've touched on before as well, somebody that has just such a great skill-first playmaking game, is going to put up the most points in the world, but is going to be a great complementary player. One guy I did want to mention, though, as potential fit too, is Kyle Palmieri, who is somebody that's been up and down in terms of his actual want of out of New York and whether he would actually go away, but he's 34 years old and actually having a pretty great year. I was going to compare him to Kyle Okposo of last year, but that would be disrespectful to him because in Palmieri's case, he has 40 points in 60 games this year, on pace for 55 points and 26 goals. He's been a really effective player for the Islanders in a shorter role. He's somebody that I think for the Panthers, especially in a third line, could do quite well. No matter what the Panthers look to upgrade, though, they're going to have the cap space to use it, which with the Matthew Tkachuk LTR just gives them so much more opportunity to breathe that they really didn't have before. I really didn't think the Panthers were going to be much of a buyer this deadline, but now they have the space to do so, which makes it even more scary. Now let's move on to my third bold prediction of this trade deadline, and it goes on to a player here that we've actually mentioned just before here in Brock Boeser of the Vancouver Canucks. And my third bold prediction is that he is going to re-sign with the Canucks this year. Now, I've been back and forth on this, whether I think he gets traded, if he does get traded, whether they flip the assets for another player like they did with Marcus Pettersson. But I think in Boeser's case, I just think about his love for Vancouver, how much he's adored playing there. And I just think in the end, they're going to come together here for some type of agreement. Now, maybe it's a situation where it happens in the offseason. That's where they actually find themselves in contract talks. But I feel like for the Canucks, this is going to really ramp up the pressure, the tension, because you're going to want to get as much as you can for Boeser if you are going to lose him in free agency, especially with how the season is going. You're not going to be a team that wins the Stanley Cup this year, at least in my opinion. But if you do end up keeping Boeser long term, it's debatable whether that's the right decision or not. But I think for the Canucks, they might bend a little bit in term, and that could be the make or break. It seems like, at least from the reporting I've seen, that the Canucks are around $7.58 million on a shorter term deal, around 5 years, while Brock Boeser wants an 8-year deal. He wants as long as humanly possible. We'll see if the Canucks are able to bend to Boeser's will. Personally, I wouldn't, but the goal scoring component is still there, and I do think he will rebound next season once things get a little bit more stable than they are right now with the Canucks. But make no mistake, if I was in charge of the Canucks and there wasn't really any sign of him being able to take a shorter term deal, I would personally trade him. I think he is expendable. He has some great attributes, and I freaking love the guy himself. But as a player, I think he's not really bringing the foot speed or the actual offensive generation himself to be a true needle mover, somebody that's going to make $8 million for 8 years and be worth that deal all throughout. I personally don't see it, but hey, maybe the Canucks do. Now going on to the fourth bold prediction of the day, let's go on here to a pretty big one, a player that's been really in the trade block for the whole season now, it seemed like, in Dylan Cozens of the Buffalo Sabres. And my bold prediction is that he will be traded to the Minnesota Wild. Now, to me, it would be a pretty good fit for a lot of different reasons, but the big thing that does hold it back is Minnesota's cap space. As Daily Faceoff puts it, right now they have about $7.5 million to work with. Pretty great, right? But a lot of that is because of Kirill Kaprizov being on LTIR, and once he's taken off of it, likely before the end of the regular season, that would mean that the Wild would be back over the cap and things would get a lot more complicated. I'll be the first one to say if the Wild were going to go for a centerman, a player like Brock Nelson, who has been largely attached to them throughout this entire trade season, would make more sense. They did trade for Gustav Nyquist, but it seems like at least to start things out, they're going to put him on the wings, so we'll see how that ends up carrying over. But if they still are looking for a centerman, I think Dylan Cozens could be a fascinating fit, and somebody that even on the wing as well, I think has a lot of potential there in that Minnesota system. Of course, we all know it has not been going his way this season in a lot of different ways, but still he's on pace for 43 points, and with how much of a nightmare season it's been for him, still the fact that he's doing that is, I think, impressive. Though at 24 years old, Buffalo's wanted to see more. They wanted to see more pace. They wanted to see more out of him, more confidence. That just has not been able to show itself. No matter where it is, though, I think Cozens just needs a change of scenery. I think he is absolutely the player on Buffalo out of everybody that has been seemingly depressed the most out of the state of the current franchise. He just has not had a lot to work with, and that confidence, especially compared to what it was a couple of seasons ago, it's night and day. He doesn't even feel like the same player. Now, there were a few forwards that I was going to suggest as potential options to go back for Cozens, obviously making $7.1 million. It's a pretty hefty contract, and it's one of the reasons I think why Cozens hasn't been dealt yet. Looking at the players that could potentially go back, I mean, the two guys in terms of cap that can make it easy is both Ryan Hartman and Yakov Trenin. It's going to be interesting because maybe there's a situation where a 3-team broker trade comes into play where some team is able to eat cap instead for Minnesota to ease that contract in. Of course, it's $7.1 million. It's a pretty hefty one. But I think for the Wild, the big thing that holds this back is Ryan Hartman's full no-move clause, which is just insane how he even got it in the first place. And it's probably why Ryan Hartman is still in Minnesota. It would have been such an easy cap fit if it wasn't for that, but likely he does have Buffalo on it and likely wouldn't waive it to go to the Sabres. So they might have to get a little bit more creative than that. But a player like Yakov Trenin, I think, would make sense for what the Sabres could want out of a deal too. Most of this, of course, is just spitballing, but I think Cozens would just be such a fun fit in Minnesota. And personally, I just want to see him go to a different team because I think his talent is just not there with Buffalo, and I'm not really sure it'll ever be again. Now, for my fifth bold prediction of the day, let's go on to another Atlantic Division younger player who I could potentially see out of nowhere getting dealt this trade deadline, and that is Drake Batherson of the Ottawa Senators. Now, this is one that I've actually postulated with one of the channel members, eLiaminator, who I mentioned to him, and we kind of went back and forth. He mentioned potentially Drake Batherson for an Alex Tuch type of swap, and that would be crazy to see. Now, I don't know if Atlantic Division teams are going to do something like that, especially for the Buffalo Sabres. I don't think they want to add somebody that's another defensive black hole onto that top six. But in Batherson's case, the offense has always been there. The speed at which he plays the game has always been there. I would say, though, in the second half, we've seen a lot of the issues with the defensive play and him kind of shrinking back to invisibility. He was somebody that started off the year so amazingly, but is back to his usual self. I look at that Ottawa forward group and man, I think they could stand to use a big upgrade on that right side, potentially going after a major player. I don't know who that would be, but I feel like Batherson could be a big player going a part of another trade. And to me, is somebody that I think for the Senators, they kind of have to speculate how much a part of the future he really is. I think most likely, though, if we were to see a Batherson trade, it would be more so in the offseason, especially around the draft. And I think the main thing that might hold it back is just because his contract is so good at $4.9 million for the next 2 seasons afterwards. Even if Batherson has his issues, his offense more than makes up for that contract alone. And I think for the Senators, especially in the position they're in, they could always use better contracts. Batherson is a pretty great one. Now, for my 6th bold prediction here, this is one that I recently thought about as an option, especially when we were talking about Nashville yesterday and what they could use, how much they could potentially tear it down. For my 6th bold prediction, what if Steven Stamkos got traded? And this is, I know, very wild, but it wouldn't honestly surprise me all that much. His tenure with Nashville so far has been dreadful. It's been abysmal. He's on pace for 45 points this year. I think the stat was he hasn't even gotten a point since January, which is insane to me. You look at it in 60 games, 17 goals, 16 assists, 33 points. Father time has arrived, yes, but I still think there is something better that Stamkos can give. He can still be more efficient, more of a power play scorer, and bring more points in the end. I don't think Stamkos is going to be the play driver that he once was, but I don't think he's as bad as he is with this Nashville team. I look at him, and if I'm Stamkos, I would personally want out as well. Nashville, I don't think is going to be anything anytime soon, and if I could go to a contender to make things work, that would be a lot better. I think some team out there is going to be able to unlock Stamkos more than he's getting unlocked in Nashville. I don't think he's going to be the 100-point player he was in Tampa Bay, but I think he could get back to around the point per game, or at least the better goal scoring that he once was. His production has just been pitiful with Nashville, and it seems like he's just kind of given up on the season. The big thing that could hold a trade back is, of course, that contract. It's honestly really rough now looking at it. $8 million for the next 3 seasons afterwards with a full no-move clause. What the heck are you thinking, Barry Trotz? It's absolutely brutal, and there's only a few teams out there, especially when you take away some of the contenders on the cap, that could even afford Stamkos in the first place. But I think for the good of Stamkos' career and for the game of hockey, I think he deserves to go somewhere else. Because let's be honest, Nashville I don't think is going to work out. Tampa Bay made the right call letting him go. And no, don't say that Tampa Bay is actually going to trade for him. They're a lot better without him personally, and I think they'll do just fine without him in the future. Now on to my 7th bold prediction of the day.
I don't know. I never thought I'd get this far.
Maybe Cody Ceci for JJ Peterka? Hey, it's a seller's market. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on my bold predictions and what your big bold prediction is for this deadline, and have a great hockey day. Goodbye.